This story took place New Year's Eve, going into 2017. I am a girl and was 19 years old at the time of this story. I went out with two of my friends, also females, to a bar. We were all underage, so none of us planned to drink at the bar. We were meeting up with some other friends, and then eventually going to a house party that we were planning to drink at. To not be standing around without a drink in our hands, we all ordered something without alcohol in it. The bar was pretty crazy, as you can imagine. My friends and I are pretty attractive girls, so we had guys giving us attention and asking us to buy us drinks while we were there. We didn't want to get into any trouble, and also knew it wasn't a smart idea to accept drinks from strangers, so we declined all of these offers. Eventually, I noticed a guy staring at me. It wasn't unusual at first, as a lot of people spend a lot of time looking at others while at a bar, but this guy started making me uncomfortable after a while. Every time I looked over at him, he was staring at me. I tried not looking at him at all after a while, but it was hard not to, as I could feel him staring. It felt like he would be looking at me, then at my drink, then looking past me, and then looking back at me. The more he did this, the more uneasy I felt. It seemed like he was waiting for an opportunity to slip something into my drink. I ended up telling my friends we needed to go to a different part of the bar, and we did. Every time we moved though, this guy would once again end up nearby. This happened several times over the next hour, until we finally left to head to the party. The house where the party was at was only about a half-mile walk from the bar. We chose the bar based on the close walking distance, since none of us wanted to have to drive at any point. Before we left the bar, we had started talking to a group of guys we recognized as mutual friends of ours that were also heading to the party. We felt a lot safer walking to the party with these guys, even though the general area was pretty populated and relatively safe regardless. We had been walking for about 5 minutes when suddenly I noticed something was wrong, very wrong. The world around me had started to spin, and I came to the realization that I somehow felt very drunk, despite only drinking soda up until this point. I stopped dead in my tracks, trying to come to my senses. At first, I was worried I was randomly having a stroke or something. The guy walking next to me, Jeff, asked me what was wrong. I told him I didn't know, which was true. I explained I just felt dizzy and a bit sick, but wasn't sure why. He told me we should hurry up and get to the party so that I could get some water, sit down, and relax. My friends I was with were a bit distracted with the two other guys now with us, but eventually they noticed what was going on. I tried following Jeff's advice and attempted to continue to walk to the party, but after maybe another minute, I felt myself losing motor function and had a hard time keeping myself upright. This is where my memory cuts out. Apparently, according to my friends, I said, "Help me," and nearly collapsed, but Jeff was able to catch me. I guess everyone was confused and concerned about what was going on. At this point, Jeff picked me up and began carrying me, as I was no longer able to walk and was barely conscious. Shortly after, my friends began hearing someone yell at them to stop, coming from behind them. They did stop and turned around to see who it was. That's when they saw the creepy guy from the bar we spent the night trying to get away from. He was jogging up to us at this point, and my friends were obviously concerned about his presence. The man came up to Jeff, pointing at him and saying, "You need to put her down and get away from her." My friends, totally confused, asked him what he was talking about. That's when he said he saw Jeff do something very suspicious to my drink while at the bar, and believed Jeff had slipped something into it. Jeff, of course, denied this, but the man didn't back down. At this point, my friends were starting to realize that something in fact did probably happen to my drink. Jeff and his friends were trying to tell the guy to get lost, but the guy stood his ground. Finally, the guy from the bar said that he would just call the police and let them sort it out. At this point, Jeff's attitude completely changed. He put me down and said he was over this. He signaled to his friends that they were leaving and began walking away. This is when my friends realized that the guy from the bar was almost certainly the one telling the truth. The police were nearby and showed up shortly after the man called them. EMS showed up after them and I was taken to the hospital. The police were able to track down Jeff and his friends a short distance away. He was questioned, but the police were going to let him go until they ran his name and found out he had a warrant. When they arrested him, he was searched and the police found he had Xanax in a bag on him. He was charged with drug possession. At the hospital, doctors ran some tests and found out that I had Xanax in my system, which I've never willingly taken before. With this information, it was quite clear what had happened. The police reviewed security footage from the bar, but there wasn't a clear angle at any point that showed Jeff tampering with my drink, as there were too many people in the way. So unfortunately, the police weren't ever able to charge him with anything more than drug possession. I recovered just fine. I felt very groggy going into the new year, but other than that, I believe I was very lucky. Things could have ended up way worse for me. I feel very lucky. The man I originally thought was being creepy was observant enough, and he had the courage to keep an eye on the situation after we left. Once he saw my condition change, his suspicions were confirmed, and he went into action. My friends and I weren't careful enough. I allowed myself to become focused on one guy that set off my creep detector, and also allowed myself to become too comfortable around guys that were only mutual friends. I definitely didn't know those guys well enough to let my guard down, but I did anyway. I have always been much more careful from this point on. I strongly encourage everyone, especially girls, to always be extra careful. Sometimes the people you trust are actually the ones that are out to get you. When I was 16 years old, I had a few friends over for New Year's Eve. My parents went to their own event, so we had the house to ourselves for the evening. My parents trusted me and knew my friends and I might be drinking a bit, so they just told me to make sure everyone acted relatively responsible. There were 4 of us at my place in total. We are all female, and we were either 16 or 17 at the time. It was around 10 p.m., and we had been listening to music, dancing around a bit, and doing some drinking. None of us were seriously into drinking, so we were all a bit buzzed at most. We all decided to order pizza. After making the phone call, we went back to partying a bit. Only about 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. We were surprised the pizza had gotten there so quick, as we assumed they would be extra busy that night. I hurried up and grabbed the money we had on the counter and went to open the door. I should have been a lot more suspicious of who was at the door, since not a lot of time had passed since ordering. But I think we really all did assume it was the pizza, and we were a bit more relaxed than usual because of the alcohol. I blindly pulled the door open and was met with a man that appeared to be in his 40s. He wasn't wearing any type of uniform and had nothing in his hands. Shocked at what I was seeing, I just stood there staring at him. He smiled and asked me if my parents were home. I didn't know what to say. All I could muster was saying the word Luckily, one of my friends noticed what was going on and said, "Sure, 1 second, I'll go get them." She then called upstairs to my parents, who of course weren't there. Unfortunately, the man called our bluff and continued waiting at the door. At this point, none of us were really sure what to do. The more time that passed, the more it became clear that there were no parents coming down to the door. The man eventually asked if he could come in. Of course, I told him no, saying that it would be best if he waited outside. His demeanor began to change, and he began to scare all of us even more than he already was. I tried shutting the door, but he put his foot in the way. Another one of my friends said he needed to go outside or else we were calling the police. This seemed to only anger the man, who then tried pushing his way in the door. I tried keeping it shut as much as possible, but he was much stronger than me. My friends ran to my aid, trying to help me stop the man from entering the home. Unfortunately, the man wasn't backing down, and despite our efforts, we were losing the fight. Out of some sort of miracle, the man suddenly stopped trying to push his way in. At this moment, I noticed headlights pulling into my driveway. The man took off, running down my street to get away from the house. By this time, I had forgotten about ordering pizza. Luckily, the delivery driver really did show up quick, probably about 30 or 35 minutes after ordering. I believe it also helped that the driver didn't have a sign on top of their car, so the man might have believed it was my parents arriving home. The delivery driver ended up being a younger looking girl that maybe weighed 130 pounds, but by the time she got out of the car, the man was long gone. Her presence of pulling in the driveway was enough on its own to scare the man off. We ended up calling the police and my parents to report what had happened. The police showed up and looked into everything, staying with us until my parents arrived home. Nothing ever came from it, and the man wasn't caught. Luckily, nothing awful happened that night, thanks to the quick pizza delivery. I just hope that man never ended up hurting anyone. I was living in New Zealand and was 23 years old. My birthday is on New Year's Day, and I'm now 28. We have a festival on the southern part of the North Island where you can camp, get drunk, and party, and it can last up to 7 days. So anyway, this was New Year's Eve. People had been up for days, and I had woken up early and decided to have a shower before everyone woke up and used all the hot water. I took all my belongings I needed and walked first to the bathroom. These ones were up some stairs in a portable building, and they were sectioned off for boys and girls. As I walked up the stairs, I heard someone call out to me. I looked around and saw a guy walking towards me. I stopped because I thought maybe he wanted to ask me a question about the camping grounds or something. He came up to me and said, "Hey, I'm John, what's your name?" and proceeded to hold his hand out to shake mine. I was like, "Oh, hey," and shook his hand. I thought this was weird, as I was partway up the stairs, and when I went to pull my hand away, he held on and then said, "Can I get your number?" I ripped my hand out of his and gave him a look that said, "Yeah, freaking right," and laughed. He looked offended, so I said, "It's 6 a.m. and you've introduced yourself to me while I'm on the way to the bathroom. I'm not giving you my number." He shrugged and went on his way, or so I thought. When I'd finished in the bathroom, I came out the door and briefly looked up when I noticed him crouched behind a tree. He didn't see me see him, so I kept it that way to scope out what he was doing. As I was walking to the shower, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed him run from behind the tree to behind a building they used to sell food that was closer to me. I was scared at this point, and the stairs to the shower were behind the building, so I walked that way. But instead of going up the stairs to enter the showers, I ran and hid. Then I saw him run around the building and up the stairs. I bolted. I was so angry and scared at this point. I kept running until I found some poor, hungover boy who was spewing his guts out, and told him what happened, and asked if I could just stand with him for a bit. Not that he would have been much help if the guy came looking for me, but the company was nice. After a bit, I had calmed down and decided to look for security, as I didn't want anyone else going through this, so I thanked the boy for his company and found one of the on-duty security officers. As we searched the campgrounds, there was a hilly part that blocked one section from the other. We walked over it and found two guys picking up anything they could find to throw at tents, and lo and behold, he was one of them. I notified the security officer it was him and then noped the heck out of there. I later heard they kicked him out of the festival. It was New Year's Eve, 2009. I was a 30-year-old man at the time and was working security for a popular nightclub. For most of the night, things were going as expected. There were a few small fights we had to break up, but nothing very serious had happened. There was always a good amount of security at this club, but we had even more of us working this particular night since we expected more people than normal and expected harder partying than normal. About an hour before midnight, the club was at maximum capacity. We were keeping an eye on everything, but everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves and acting pretty civil for the most part. Suddenly, I noticed some type of disturbance happening from part of the club that wasn't too far from me. Assuming it was a fight, I headed that way and navigated my way through the crowd of people. As I got closer, I noticed people were trying to run from the disturbance, even tripping over each other in the process. Normally, people might back up because of a fight, but most have a tendency to try to watch it. So at this point, I started thinking something else might be going on, but I still needed to get closer to be able to assess it. Once I pushed my way through everyone, I was able to see what was going on. A man had a gun in his hand and was waving it around, pointing it at different people. When I got close to him, he turned towards me and pointed the gun at me. From behind him, another member of security arrived and tried getting the gun from the man. Unfortunately, the man turned around to face him before he had a chance of grabbing it, and the security officer was struck in the head with the gun. The man then pointed the gun at him, and I took my opportunity to lunge at the man. I dove on top of him while trying to smack his arm downwards. I am a really large, strong guy, and I brought the man to the ground very hard. The man dropped the gun as he fell, and I put him in a chokehold to prevent him from getting up or going back after the weapon. The police were called, and other members of security helped me detain the man while we were waiting for them to arrive. Several minutes later, the police arrived and the man was placed under arrest with several different charges, including assault for striking the other member of security. It turned out that the gun was a modified airsoft gun, making it appear more realistic. It was also unloaded, but in the midst of everything, I'm sure everyone assumed it to be real. I know I did. There were a handful of people taken to the hospital for minor injuries they sustained while trying to get away from the man. Luckily, no one was shot, and the injuries weren't more severe, as not enough people noticed what was going on for a complete stampede to take place. The security officer that was struck in the head with the gun also received treatment for his laceration, including stitches. He recovered fine and was even back at work for his next shift a couple days later. This all happened on a Tuesday night. My significant other, Kyle, and I went to an absolutely fantastic concert for New Year's Eve. We met up with a few friends, but they all left right after midnight. The bands were great, so we wanted to stay for the rest of the show. Kyle got a call from a good friend, Nathan, around 1 a.m. Nathan said he was at the same bar and wanted to know if we were still there. We were stoked because Nathan never gets out of the house. He's a super cool guy and we love hanging out with him. He had his girlfriend with him, who I like a lot, and his friend Derek. I don't like Derek at all. Derek just gives off a creepy vibe. He talks slow and monotone, and stares for too long and leans in too close. He is Nathan's pity friend. They were best friends for a long time, and Derek's family did a lot for Nathan during a rough time. Nathan will bring him along every now and then because he feels obligated at this point, but he has no trust in him whatsoever. Derek is also a drug addict. Anyway, we all hang out and have some laughs. Derek sits there being freaky as usual, just staring at everyone. When he would speak, it would be something off the wall and completely unrelated to anything we were talking about. Once, he looked at Dawn and I and said, "I think it'd be really weird if you two made out." Okay, yeah, it would be pretty weird. We ignored him and kept having fun. The bar closed down and Kyle asked them if they wanted to come to our house and have some more drinks and play foosball and Tekken. I was a little annoyed because he didn't okay this with me first and I was ready for bed. I wasn't that upset though, and I know Kyle likes to have company. I told Kyle that I wouldn't mind if it was just Nathan and Dawn, but I don't want Derek in our house and that I don't trust him. Kyle brushes it off and says, "What's the worst that can happen? It'll be fine, he's just weird." Well, when we were all leaving, we had to wait for Derek in the parking lot for the longest time. It turns out, he was waiting outside the door of the bar and trying to get any girl to come with him, bribing them with free pills. I got mad and said, "What makes you think it's okay to invite random people to my house?" And he just laughed. We got to my house, and Derek sat on the couch by me. He keeps poking me, and when I ask him what he wants, he just stares at me for about 10 seconds before saying, "What's up?" I started ignoring him. He continued to poke me or try to tickle my feet. I wouldn't even look over. Then he starts getting phone calls from people asking for pills. I went to the bathroom and he tried to follow me in there. I just pushed him out and locked the door, and he continued to knock. After this, he starts trying to get Nathan and Dawn to take him home, which was 45 minutes away, and it was 4 a.m. They tell him no way, that they had agreed that he was staying with them. They actually wanted to go to their house and sleep in their own bed, 10 minutes away. He didn't want to go to their house. He either wanted to go home or stay at our house. He started whining and telling me that I had to convince them to stay, and I told him no. He started saying that Dawn had drank too much to drive. The girl had had 1 beer the entire night. When they were going to leave, Derek came back in and said he needed to use the bathroom. Kyle was overly trusting of people and doesn't pay attention to weird behavior. I am the opposite, so I was keeping an eye on Derek. I caught him going through my prescription bottles. They were nothing but antibiotics, but it pissed me off that he was trying to steal from us anyway. I told him he needed to leave immediately. He then stood in our kitchen, refusing to leave, staring at us. I said that they were waiting on him and he needed to go with them. He kept staring and said, "Don't you remember that time I gave you guys a ride? Well, make it even. You either convince them to stay, or I stay here and you guys take me home." No way. He gave us a ride home when we had a flat tire once, and we lived 2 blocks apart at the time. We are not going 45 minutes away to take a weirdo home that's refusing to leave for reasons unknown. He kept saying that Dawn was drunk. Kyle speaks up and says, "If you get in a roadblock, I'll come get you." Derek said, "Well, are you going to post the bail too? Because we're your responsibility now." I'm beyond frustrated at this point and told Kyle, "You invited them, now get rid of him," and I went and sat on the couch. Derek continued to stand there and stare at Kyle. Kyle, normally passive, is getting angry and telling him it's time for him to go, and that we aren't taking him home or convincing anyone to stay. Derek says that he's not leaving, so he has to do one or the other. Kyle finally went outside and he got Nathan to come and literally dragged Derek to the car. Nathan has apologized profusely and says that he isn't bringing Derek around anymore. I also asked Kyle to not invite people over without okaying it with me first. 1, because we both live there and it's rude. 2, because he doesn't pay attention to weird people. And 3, because he invites people over at inappropriate times. Of course, this goes both ways. I'll make sure he's cool with me bringing people over as well.